code switching. Could you tell us what that is and how that works?
Sure. Yeah. So on one level, you could say that even be more careful about the way you speak as a
Hmm.
kind of code switching, because you're changing the way you pronounce things or the way you say things based on whatever context you're in. So maybe you want to speak a little more formally in some context.
Mm-hmm.
We know that if you're writing a term paper, for example, your language is going to be a lot more formal than if you're, texting with a friend, for
Right.
example. And so you can look at it in terms of formality, but you can also look at it in different contexts as well. And sometimes the changes can be small, and sometimes the changes can be quite large. So, if, for example, you're in an academic context, and the variety that you grew up with um, is quite different from that academic variety, then you're going to do more switching in that context, right? And so, people whose first or yeah, I guess first, their most natural variety of English, for example, is quite different from an academic variety of English. They really need to learn how to make that switch in order to be successful in school and in some kinds of workplaces.
Sure.
And so you'll hear it often used in the context of people who speak maybe a particular ethnic based dialect, something like that, because they are the ones that often face the most kinds of discrimination
Right.
in some of these contexts.
Right.
And but the term comes from like second language acquisition if you're changing from one language to another. But in sociolinguistics, we can use code to mean a lot of different things.
Okay.
So can you give us example of communities that have ethno-dialects and that they switch to standard English and sometimes what happens to them if they don't do that?
Sure.
What
Yeah. So there's research on a lot of different communities. African American students, in particular, have faced a lot of discrimination
yes.
if they grow up speaking African American vernacular English. And people like their teachers and others at school tell them that that's just bad English, that they don't know how to speak English correctly. Some other students who face that kind of discrimination as well, or that bias, are Chicano English speakers, for example. So some of it can be linked to ethnicity and the kind of community that you grew up that way. But if you think about it, how difficult would that be if you go to school and then people start telling you that the language of your home is bad, right? This can be really detrimental, not just in terms of, you know, these students having to make this adjustment in school and sometimes being placed in classes that don't reflect their actual academic abilities.
Right.
They can also be harmful just to their self-esteem and to their identity, right? Because they're saying this is who I am, this is how everyone around me speaks, and now you're telling me that all those people are wrong. In reality, whatever variety of language you speak, you can do all the things you need to
Yeah.
with it. But some varieties have more sort of cultural capital, are beneficial that way. But you can see this with regional varieties as well. There's research showing that people from the American South are often seen as being very friendly, but not necessarily very intelligent, just based on the way that they speak. And this is often perpetuated through media stereotypes. If you think about different characters you've seen in movies or in
Hmm.
TV shows, um, who are the people who are kind of the dumb ones? What variety do they speak?
'Kay.
Or who are the troublemakers? And the more that you see particular types
Mhm.
associated with a particular accent, then the more that gets reinforced. Because again, it's not that there's anything about those particular linguistic features
Mhm.
that directly link to, how smart you are or how funny somebody is, right? But over time, those some features can come to index some of those stances, and those can be reinforced through the media.
Fascinating. Can you give an example of how, for example, perceptions have changed in the last 50 years or 100 years now? Can you give examples of
Perceptions of different varieties,
Yeah.
or
Right.
um, I guess that'd be a little bit tricky to answer without looking at specific data.
Mhm.
I think that people are a little bit more aware now about diversity and about the value of
Mhm.
diversity in communities. I think that people are more aware of The idea of representation. If you see a particular type of character always having a particular type of accent, that it might be hard for an actor with that accent to be able to be cast in a different role, right? And I think that people are a little more aware of those things now, um, at least in terms of race and gender and trying to be more inclusive in media. And I think that that helps to some extent with the way that different varieties of language are used as well. Um, but I think it'd be an interesting study to look at that because these are ideas that start sort of in society as a whole, but then can be then picked up by the media, but then the media again feeds that into society, and so you have this sort of cycle. And so if you have more representation in media with people playing different roles and different accents being featured in different contexts, then you're more likely to have that kind of diversity represented positively.